in an adventurous mood and with the intention to be ironic rather than polemic. For this lead-off presentation, I chose the title of Institutionalized Religion and Lived Religion, Knowing the Difference and Lasting Long Enough to Talk About It. My objective is to convince you that there's a need for a more scholarly approach towards religion in Puerto Rican studies. Faith-motivated believers know that there are sins of commission, but also sins of omission. It is all too easy to focus on the obvious mischaracterizations of religion that crop up. No, Catholics do not worship the Virgin Mary, and Santeria does not invoke the devil. But the more damaging trespasses against religion come from omission. I assure you that I forgive those who trespass against us, but that's not the same thing as giving absolution. Let me begin with the book entitled The Latino Condition, published out of NYU Press in 1998. This is a reader that covers many subjects and examines most of the significant Latino groups. It is a voluminous 736-page book weighing 2.8 pounds. But the index carries no entries on religion, church, rosary, Bible. I ask, how can you describe our condition without including religion? How can you celebrate Las Navidades without talking about the religious meaning of Christmas? How can you say ay bendito without recognizing there's something about blessings? From the rosary around the neck to the Bible under the arm to the prayers offered to saints and to the santeros, religion permeates the Puerto Rican experience. The Nationalist Party of Pedro Albizu Campos used Catholic ideology and symbolism. Bishops and pastors led political mobilizations against militarism when it came to the Vietnam War last century and the removal of the U.S. Navy from Vieques this century. Excluding all of these religious topics weakens the credibility of the scholarship about the Latino condition. Closer to the subject of Puerto Ricans in New York is a chapter in Mambo Montage, given the intriguing title of Nuyol by the author, who describes his article as the fruit of his 20 years as, quote, activist, organizer, and public intellectual in New York City, end of quote. I found not a single mention of religion or religious groups, and no citation or bibliographical listing that address religion among our people in this chapter. One might deduce from this startling silence that religious groups have played no role at all among the Puerto Ricans of New York City since the opening decades of the last century, not even as conservative culprits. Yet it is a fact that more Puerto Ricans belong to churches than belong to unions. More of our people go to religious services than go to political demonstrations. And the most long-enduring institution that brought different Latin American nationalities together as Latinos or Hispanics in New York City has been the church, that regularly asked each nationality to honor each other's saint or Madonna in seasonal feast days. You would have to live in a bubble not to witness the organized efforts of congregations and parishes working through clergy and community coalitions that constantly pressure city government about issues like housing and social services. Even if he only intended to dismiss religion as unimportant, the author's task of assessing our reality, it seems to me, requires respect for the research already available in books and the articles evaluating religious movements, which in fact are more long-lasting than most of the social movements described in this chapter. Are these and similar works that totally omit mention of religion bad scholarship? Or are they merely inadequate? Our conference today is intended to explore this issue for future scholarship in Puerto Rican studies. Moreover, if we accept the premise that the field has a collective obligation to teach the truth about our people and their experiences, omission of religion in such telling ways reflects badly on all of us in the field. Introducing competent analysis of religion into the classrooms for religious and Puerto Rican studies, is an uphill journey. The City University of New York is a remarkably secular institution, even if many of our students reflect the diversity of religious belief on campus. And in the secular environment of CUNY, a professor promoting his or her religious belief in the classroom would likely suffer censure, perhaps even if except maybe if the faculty was Judaic studies. That's a tradition where religion is accepted at CUNY in large measure. But if a professor was teaching something religious in that classroom, I expect they would be criticized. But is the opposite true? Would the university censor a professor for promoting his or her anti-religious belief in the classroom? I venture to say that secularity is often not a form of religious neutrality, but rather an excuse to remove religion from the classroom with the not-so-secret hope that this helps make it extinct in the real world. It would be a professor's crass self-indulgence to advocate his or her private anti-religious prejudices in this way. It's also bad pedagogy, since we have a professional obligation to render an honest appraisal of the religious factors in Puerto Rican experience, especially since many of our students come from religious families that place great importance upon education. In a word, competency requires Puerto Rican studies to include the varieties of religious experience in our classroom teaching. That inclusion, however, should flow from a comparative approach to religion that does not favor one faith over the other, but presents them all as integral parts of Puerto Rican studies. Since the field of comparative religion, also known as religious studies, has limited visibility for many, allow me here to outline some premises for following the path of inclusion to a better Puerto Rican studies. Point number one, and if we had the PowerPoint, which we don't need, I would say this: religion is older and larger than culture. Let me clarify that. When we speak of the Taino culture, for instance, we're really speaking of the Taino religion. These first Boricuas did not fashion pottery or go on the hunt, marry, or make merry without reference to religion. The same is true for the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, and the like. The separation of culture from religion is an invention of the European Enlightenment. It is filtered down into the standard textbooks that carry subtitles like Taino economy, Taino culture, Taino art, Taino religion, as if each were separate. If we want to understand, however, how the Tainos and the Tainas thought and lived, we would have to begin reassembling these neat conceptual categories into the tangle of beliefs and social rules. I would also note that religion has outlasted both the Enlightenment and Marxism, each of which prophesied the near approaching end of religion. In both cases, I think secularists fail to appreciate the ability of religion to reshape itself. Failed religions are usually not replaced with secularism, but with substitution by another set of religious beliefs. Religious studies as a discipline pays great attention to the processes wherein, rather than total replacement of one religion with the other, the result is also a hybridization or a syncretism of overlapping customs and beliefs. Now, the scholar who knows how to study hybridization in cultural terms, I suggest, can extend those tools to the experience of religion. I'm not saying that we can reject the intellectual categories that separate religion and culture. My emphasis here is to say that the lived religion of our people joins them and does not stem from elitist positions taken by academia. Second point, religion has a moral/ethical dimension to its tradition that is not controlled. In terms of lived religion, we often encounter the moral dimension of religion through the maintenance of these traditions. Baptizing one's child or attending the wake or a funeral of one's mother are experienced as duties. And it is not uncommon for a Puerto Rican who never goes to church to fear breaking with that tradition. Hay que enterrar la vieja. There's a real feeling of ethical norm that goes to that. So that unlike cultural preferences, religious choices involve morality. And to the believer, bad choices involve sin. Admittedly, sin's not a topic that enters into the classroom easily. But But in the interest of the varieties of religious experience as a preferred approach, it needs to be said that what may be illicit moral choices in one religion is fine and dandy in another. Saying prayers to find one's true love, for example, takes on different forms in evangelical Protestantism, in Catholicism, and in Santeria. But people still want to find someone to love. So including all of them in the classroom without either discarding or endorsing one over the other is not easy, but it is a necessary step in explaining the complexity of the real world, opening the way for students to comprehend, even based on their own religious or lack of religious experience, the differing facets of the Puerto Rican experience. In sum, pedagogy is better served by relativizing each religious perception rather than in dismissing them all. My third point. When misapplied, tradition becomes superstition. When related to current philosophy and social issues, it becomes theology. Now, I don't want to give all religious beliefs a pass. Saying that there are good experiences of religion is not a denial that bad experiences exist. And most religions are self-policing in the sense that they promote orthodoxy on the one hand and they denounce heresy on the other. The doctrinal and written record of orthodoxies and heresies is relatively easy to understand, even if you're not particularly religious. The harder task is to recognize when obedience to tradition becomes an end in itself, losing its connection to belief. For instance, it's one thing to say that on Good Friday, I abstain from working as a carpenter. Quite another to say, if I hammer a nail or drive a peg into the ground, I commit a sin because I make Jesus suffer. There's two different ways, maybe the same practice, but the reason is different. So the scholar of religion is trained to detect these kinds of leaps in logic and call them superstitious or syncretism. In this context, institutionalized religion provides the scholar with texts, particularly those that come from religion's gatekeeper, the theologian. In addition to preventing the distortion of belief, theologians also take on the positive role of updating the faith to contemporary situations and current philosophical vocabularies. Thus, for instance, the late Bishop Antulio Parrilla used the Aristotelian concept of natural law taken from St. Thomas Aquinas to justify Puerto Rican independence. Closer to our time, concept of mestizaje and of el hosco, taken from secular writers like José Vasconcelos y Alvarado Díaz Alfaro, have been used as the axis for theologies of the Latino experience. So that both simple superstition and advanced theology coexist within religions. It's not one or the other, it's both and. And they often compete with each other, and that's what the scholar must study. My last point of introduction here is the Gramscian model of organic intellectuals or organic intellectuality is a most useful concept. In understanding how religion affects our people, Gramsci's concept that the organic intellectual is indispensable. If you look at Juan Gonzalez in Harvest of Empire, which I think is an excellent book for many courses, he understands this without necessarily using that concept. That's because church membership empowers believers with well-developed systems of ethical thinking that often belie the rather modest levels of education and social status. Gramsci saw grassroots religious leaders embrace loyalty and trust of Catholic wisdom in Italy of his day, and he said, the believers do it better than do the Marxists. Now, it's not asking too much of scholars today to test Gramsci's theory when assessing social movements among believers. Protestants and evangelicals, especially among our people, demonstrate exceptional achievements in organic leadership, and their churches have supplied a high percentage of leaders in politics, public administration, education, community organizing, and Puerto Rican studies. But even for those who mistakenly believe that any religious movement is controlled by elites at the top level of institutional power, it needs to be noted that along with Gramsci, that those elites are themselves responsible to a text, and the norms are upheld by the faithful and held over the head of the leadership. To summarize these 4 4 premises of religious studies. I would stress that to analyze religion, you need to differentiate it from culture. First point. Secondly, you have to know what is superstitious folklore and appreciate theology and evaluate organic intellectuality. As simple as it may be to reduce religious studies to these 4 points, however, I will warn you that the discipline itself is divided into rival camps. At one extreme are those who use rational choice theory to explain religious behavior. As the title suggests, this is a line of analysis looking for the articulated reasons for believers for their choices. The institutional statements of doctrine and purpose figure hugely in this approach. At the other end is the acceptance of lived religion. This effort gathers the hodgepodge of religious symbols, feelings, traditions, and motivations, throws them into the same pot, and declines to impose rationality upon the jumble that results. In a sort of postmodernist way, lived religion is content with individualized experience and unintimidated by loose ends. It often captures more of the religious reality by this potpourri approach than by rationalizing categories. But here's the point. There's enough middle ground between these 2 approaches to allow for a comfort zone. And since the multidisciplinary approach to scholarship is part of the DNA of Puerto Rican studies, I would like to finish this part of the presentation by suggesting how certain disciplines that analyze with religion might mesh with our larger fields. I'll call this a pocket guide that's a handy roadmap on what to look for. The first discipline to be used and explored is theology. I think theology can be imported to Puerto Rican studies as the history of ideas. Theology has witnessed the creation of schools and movements using particular versions of philosophical thought. The scholar, Puerto Rican studies scholar, should pay attention to how a theology is connected with politics, nationalist movements, revolutions, and the like. When presenting events in the Puerto Rican experience, you can look to distinguish the various theologies that are either in support of or opposed to the issue. Expect to find religious responses on both sides of virtually every issue, and be prepared to see who wins and creates orthodoxy and who loses and becomes a centered heretic. Usually the heretics are more interesting. In the life of Albizu Campos, for instance, clerics spoke out about his application of the just war theory to Puerto Rican independence. With the North American clergy, both Catholic and Protestant, mostly opposed to what Albizu was saying. But the Spanish clergy were mostly in favor, and most of the native Puerto Rican Protestant clergy were in favor. In sum, when approaching an official teaching, consider other data that measure opposition, the level of popular acceptance, and the inner dynamics of self-interest. History. Church history is not a big man theory. You know, Pope so-and-so did this, Bishop so-and-so did this, Reverend did that. But in Catholicism, it comes pretty close to being a big man theory. Other churches tend to follow the route of a founder. For instance, Mama Leo, that Maria's written about from the Bronx. And pretty soon we're going to be hearing from Raymond Rivera about the Bronx and other things. And so people like Juan Lugo are looked at as beginners of a movement. Seldom does this leader emerge without multiple forces in politics, theology, sociology that create movements to follow up and support their vision. It is useful, therefore, when looking at history and religion, to pay attention to who founded a movement and when, erected a church building, or met with a political leader. And you will find that women are often the driving force behind decisions of mission boards or Catholic prelates or whatever else. And the approaches that women's history have used in other forms can be imported very easily into history of religion, church history, and what have you. The resources are there, and we're going to add some more for you. Literature. Scripture scholars of the Bible are essentially students of literature. Yes, there are fundamentalists who are incapable of nuance, but most denominations today work collaboratively to use concepts like myth, Levi Strauss, okay? Constructed history, the Gospels, constructed history, the framing of parables and prophecies. Etymologies, You know, the Canaanites were named after Cain. He was the first Canaanite. Most importantly, scripture studies explore how texts are connected to oral history and collective memory, and they often then find their way into ritual and hymnology. Puerto Rican Espiritismo, which is not the same thing as Santeria, depends upon reading the works of Elaine Kardec. That's not his real name, but anyway, Hippolyte doesn't sound right. His texts invoke positivism, masonry, and ancient Greek religion, Egyptian religion, fertile ground for literary analysis. The lives of the saints and the witness autobiographies in Protestantism exhibit the same characteristics of a literary genre. And it is only stating the obvious that virtually every Puerto Rican novel worthy of its name has descriptions of religious customs and values that demand from the competent teacher definition of what these things mean so that the text may be understood. And I'll add here that they overlap. You can't talk about the importance of holy water in Santeria without understanding what holy water is in Catholicism. Sociology. I'm married to a sociologist, which is not the same as being married to sociology. There's a difference. Sociology measures frequency and distribution and thus defines social behavior. Surveys feature mightily in contemporary sociology, although it's imperative that the questionnaire have clear and meaningful entries. So it's not enough to say so many people say this and say that, especially in a religious topic, without a greater insight. Garbage in, garbage out defines sociology. Famous saying from Fordham's University's department. I'll give you an example. One poorly informed sociologist, who's not Latino, defined intensity as a Catholic by the number of subscriptions to a magazine called the Catholic Digest. His statistics were impeccable. So many subscriptions, so many Catholics, these are the Catholics, the better. And he wrote, based on that observation, that Hispanics were the worst of all Catholics in the United States of America because they had the lowest level of subscriptions to this magazine. He never thought, apparently, that maybe preference for reading materials in Spanish could enter into the picture. Okay, so garbage in, garbage out. I would say that the 1990 survey conducted by Latino scholars, this is Discipio Angelo Falcone et al., they asked a question about being a born-again Christian, only to find that this concept was not used at that time among Catholics. The best fit for survey, I submit, is that with the research that adopts a socio-historical approach and considers the collective action through institutions. This was the guiding principle for the plural study of which we shall speak more. Anthropology. Anthropology is the easiest of the social science disciplines to reconcile with religious studies, especially if you use the lived religion approach. You don't have to organize things, just throw them together. Not to say that that's all that anthropologists do, but they have a lot of fun in doing it. The caveat, however, is that studies focused on particular communities do not offer generalization, do not prove generalization to the population as a whole. And this would be the caution that I would make upon many works of Santeria or Pentecostalism. People have a very vivid experience in one particular case, and then there's a tendency to jump to a conclusion that all Puerto Ricans are this way or all Latinos are a particular way. And that can be illusory as a premise. Political science. Political science is the gatekeeper at a particularly important bridge between religious behavior and social impact. It was Max Weber who famously asked, what is the link between a religious ethos and one's worldview? Answering that simple question requires, however, special skills. For example, in evaluating religious support for community organizing, Sidney Verba of Harvard asked, did you participate in a meeting where decisions were made by a democratic vote? So he went around to different people and religions and he said, did you participate in a decision made by democratic vote? And based on the responses, he concluded that Catholics were less democratic and progressive than Protestants and evangelicals. Not content with his findings, Verba attempted a theological interpretation. Catholics were less democratic, he wrote, because among other things they did not ordain women. Well, we asked the same question in the Parral study, and we found that there were often more leaders in Catholicism as a percentage of leaders of a particular community than in Protestant evangelical churches. We found 15% was the norm for all the churches, but 18% of the Catholic communities had a woman as the head leader. How did we get that? We avoided the word pastor. If you ask who's the pastor, it has to be a male in the Catholic Church. But if you say who does the work and is actually the leader and pulls it all together, it was the woman. So sensitivity in the sociology concept of asking the right question and using the right word is very important. Of course, a forthcoming book that I co-edited with Centro's Carlos Vargas Ramos goes into detail about religion as a mobilizer for political involvement. But the salient issue for the political scientists is to go beyond statistics on voting patterns and discern how religious organizations motivate people about the moral implications within political issues. Often the mode of the delivery of such stimulus, such as a sermon or a ritual or a pragmatic signature gathering, is a vital component that explains why people vote better than actually how they vote. Let me conclude. My exhortation is to include the varieties of religious experience in the classroom rather than exclude any consideration of religion at all as in the curriculum. I suggest that this can be done by applying oneself to accept the validity of fields like religious studies, theology, sociology of religion, just as one might for research stemming from study of other Latino groups, or gender-designated populations, or union membership, or students in ideological political movements. The path to inclusion is also a path to more effective teaching, and ultimately the path for truth. And as some may remember, it has been said, the truth will set you free. Thank you.
No mention was made of the role of religion and spirituality in terms of physical health and mental health, especially with the aging of the migrant community, and secondly, the huge ingression of immigrants from Central, South America, and the Caribbean. And we're finding now that in studies of dementia of the Alzheimer's type, the Latino is especially vulnerable, partly because of diet and lifestyle. Could you say a few words to that, please?
One of the most important books on the extension of mental health and mental health care was done by Alan Hardwood, called RX Recipe, Spiritistus Needed. And going to your point on another tangent, and I would consider this kind of anthropology, here it would be medical anthropology, what was discovered was that the usual way that psychologists treated people with a mental illness was out of this classic Freudian lay on the couch and tell me about your childhood. And it was inefficient to expect people with mental health problems in the community. So what he discovered was that sending people to a santero had them talk about their life experience. Now, I presume they have certain borderlines that they follow. But the point was that religion, and this is what I think you're saying, religion can function in its own ambient and provide the same introspection or dealing with needs of people, psychological and medical and otherwise, that medical science or medical treatment on its own cannot do. Anything to do with an operation on one's body, anything to do with sexuality, childbearing, always brings in it a host of religious questions, and this varies from the level or the degree or the identity that people have in religious practice. So what people do ordinarily in hospitals is they provide a chaplain and some sort of consultation. In studying that reality, obviously we should be aware of it. I thank you for that observation.
You mentioned the notion that religion is older and larger than a culture, and yet don't the classical sociologists going back to Durkheim and Weber and even the next generation of Gertz and Berger suggest at least that religion is fundamentally intertwined with culture, and some would even advocate is culture and culture is religion. So who exactly would you like to be citing as a contemporary sociologist that would suggest that religion is larger than culture? Anyone that you had in mind?
What they do is they'll talk about primitive religion. And what they'll do is they'll draw a distinction between this kind of tribal or other kind of spontaneous organizations, and then they suggest that as people get more refined, they narrow down the function and they divide secularity from religion. Malinowski's famous treatment on the guys in the fishing boats in the Pacific Islands, he pointed out that every time they go out to fish, they say a prayer. They said, well, no, unless we say the prayer, we won't catch the fish. They came back and they had no fish. So he says, didn't that prove God didn't exist? They said, don't be silly. You know, it doesn't work all the time. But they still felt that to catch fish, they had to say the prayer. Saying the prayer did not magically guarantee that they would catch the fish. And that's the way that faith works. So if you are within the understanding of belief, I think religion, was Schleiermacher that said that philosophy is the religion of the few, but religion is the philosophy of the many.